Why does alcohol start to feel different after 30? For many people, drinking in their 20s comes with a quick recovery. A rough night leads to a slow morning, but within a day or two, everything resets. But sometime after 30, something shifts. The same amount feels heavier, recovery takes longer, sleep is more disrupted, focus doesn't return the way it used to. Something is actually changing inside the brain, and understanding what reveals something important about how the brain adapts over time. The answer starts with two of the brain's most important chemical messengers, GABA and glutamate. GABA is the brain's primary calming signal. It slows neural activity and creates a sedative effect. Glutamate does the opposite. It drives alertness, focus, and mental energy. Together, these two systems are constantly working to keep the brain in balance. When alcohol enters the system, it enhances GABA and suppresses glutamate. The result is a slowdown in brain activity. That's what produces the familiar feeling of relaxation. Thoughts slow, tension fades, the nervous system shifts into a quieter state. But the brain doesn't stay passive, it adapts. To counteract the suppression, the brain increases glutamate activity and reduces its sensitivity to GABA. It's essentially pushing back, trying to keep overall activity at a functional level. This is one of the first signs of how resilient the brain actually is. But when alcohol leaves the system, that compensation doesn't immediately reverse. The brain is temporarily left in an overstimulated state, glutamate elevated, GABA sensitivity reduced. This rebound is one of the key reasons sleep is disrupted after drinking, and why anxiety or restlessness can follow a night of heavy use. After 30, this dynamic becomes more pronounced. The brain's ability to regulate and recover from these chemical shifts begins to slow, not dramatically, but enough to notice. Recovery from a single night out takes slightly longer. The mental fog lingers a little more, and the cycle repeats with less room for error. What makes this particularly relevant is that most people don't attribute these changes to alcohol directly. The effects are gradual and easy to explain away: stress, aging, a busy schedule, but the pattern is consistent, and the underlying chemistry explains why. Sleep is one of the first places this shows up. Alcohol suppresses REM sleep, the stage most critical for memory, emotional regulation, and cognitive recovery. REM is when the brain consolidates information from the day, processes emotional experiences, and performs a kind of internal maintenance that keeps cognitive function sharp. When REM is disrupted, those processes are cut short. Even when total sleep time looks normal, the quality is fundamentally different. REM cycles are shortened or eliminated entirely in the first half of the night. The brain doesn't fully reset, and the deficit tends to accumulate one disrupted night layering onto another. In younger years, the brain compensates more efficiently. It can recover lost REM in the nights that follow and bounce back relatively quickly. But after 30, that flexibility decreases. The disruption lingers longer, and the cognitive cost becomes harder to offset. That slower, heavier feeling the morning after a few drinks, it's not just tiredness, it's a brain that didn't complete the recovery process it needed. Reaction times slow. Emotional regulation becomes slightly harder. Mental clarity takes longer to fully return. And the more frequently that cycle repeats, the more difficult it becomes to fully recover between episodes. It's worth noting that this isn't just about feeling tired. Chronic REM disruption has been linked to changes in emotional resilience, decision-making, and even long-term memory retention. The brain needs those cycles not occasionally, but consistently. And alcohol, even in moderate amounts, reliably interferes with them. But sleep is only part of the picture. Alcohol also affects something deeper: neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to form new connections, adapt to new information, and recover from stress. It's how learning happens, how memory solidifies, how the brain stays sharp over decades. This process depends heavily on a protein called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. BDNF acts like a growth signal for neurons, supporting the formation of new synaptic connections and the maintenance of existing ones. Alcohol suppresses BDNF production, and when BDNF levels drop, the brain's ability to adapt and rewire begins to slow. After 30, neuroplasticity naturally decreases slightly. This is a normal part of aging, but alcohol can amplify that decline by interfering with the formation of new neural connections and reducing the efficiency of existing ones. This doesn't mean the brain stops learning. It means the process becomes less efficient over time. Focus takes more effort. Memory recall slows slightly. Mental processing isn't quite as quick. Learning a new skill or retaining complex information requires more repetition than it once did. These changes don't happen overnight, but they build. And over months and years, the cumulative effect on cognitive performance becomes harder to ignore. Another system affected is dopamine, the neurotransmitter most closely tied to motivation and reward. Alcohol temporarily increases dopamine levels in a region of the brain called the nucleus accumbens, often referred to as the brain's reward center. This surge contributes to the pleasurable, reinforcing feeling that drinking produces. It's part of why alcohol is so easy to associate with relaxation and social enjoyment. But repeated exposure changes how the brain responds to that signal. Over time, the brain adjusts to the artificial dopamine spikes by reducing its baseline sensitivity. Dopamine receptors become less responsive. The reward system recalibrates, and what once produced a strong sense of pleasure begins to produce a more muted effect. This shift has consequences beyond drinking, because dopamine is involved in motivation across all areas of life: work, relationships, creativity, exercise. When baseline sensitivity drops, everyday activities can start to feel less engaging, less rewarding, less worth the effort. After 30, this becomes more significant, because the brain is already undergoing natural shifts in dopamine regulation as part of aging. Alcohol adds another layer of disruption on top of that. The result can be subtle changes in mood, motivation, and daily energy, not dramatic, but consistent enough to feel over time. There's one more factor most people don't think about: neuroinflammation. Alcohol can trigger low-grade inflammation in brain tissue by activating immune cells called microglia. Under normal conditions, microglia act as the brain's maintenance crew, clearing waste, repairing damage, and supporting healthy neural function. But when alcohol is present, they can shift into an inflammatory state, releasing compounds that interfere with how neurons communicate. This inflammation isn't something you feel directly. There's no pain signal, but the downstream effects are real: slower neural transmission, reduced clarity, and a general dampening of cognitive efficiency. When combined with disrupted sleep, altered neurotransmitter balance, and reduced neuroplasticity, the effects compound. That feeling of mental fog, the difficulty concentrating the day after drinking, the sense that thinking is slower than usual. These aren't random. They're connected, and they become more apparent as the brain's ability to compensate decreases with age. The key insight here is that these changes aren't caused by a single night of drinking. They're caused by patterns, repeated inputs over time. After 30, the brain becomes less forgiving of repeated disruption, not because something is broken, but because it's working differently. The margin for recovery is smaller, and the effects of chronic disruption accumulate more visibly. So what does alcohol actually do to the brain after 30? It alters the balance between GABA and glutamate. It suppresses REM sleep. It reduces dopamine sensitivity. It increases neuroinflammation, and it slows the efficiency of neuroplasticity. None of these changes happen all at once. None of them are immediately dramatic, but together, they shift how the brain functions and how it feels. The brain after 30 is still highly capable, still adaptable, still responsive, but it requires more consistency to maintain its balance. And when that balance is repeatedly disrupted, the effects become more visible, not just in how you feel the next morning, but in how clearly you think and how fully you recover. Because the brain isn't just reacting to a single moment, it's adjusting to patterns. And what it adjusts to becomes the new baseline. But here's where it gets interesting. Because the same brain that changes under consistent alcohol exposure also changes when alcohol is removed. Even within just 1 week, several of these systems begin to shift, sometimes in ways that are faster and more significant than most people expect. If you want to see exactly what happens to your body when you stop drinking for a week, watch this next.